The shrill ring of the phone pierced the quiet of our kitchen, making me jump. I wiped my hands on my apron and answered, expecting to hear Bennett's voice. Instead, my mother-in-law's saccharine tone oozed through the receiver. "Miranda, darling," Claire cooed, "I'm hosting a little family gathering next weekend. I'd love for you to sing for us." My stomach clenched. In the 15 years I'd been married to Bennett, Claire had never once asked me to perform. "Sing?" I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, yes," she continued, her words dripping with false enthusiasm. "Everyone's always going on about your voice. I thought it was high time we all heard it." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. "That's unexpected," I managed. Claire's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Don't be modest, dear. It'll be lovely. Sophie can accompany you on the piano. I've been giving her lessons, you know." My free hand clenched into a fist. Of course, I knew. Claire had been monopolizing my daughter's weekends for months now, all under the guise of quality time with Grandma. "I'll have to check with Bennett," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, I've already spoken to him. He thinks it's a wonderful idea." Of course he did. Bennett never could see through his mother's machinations. "Well then," I said, forcing a smile into my voice, "I guess I'll start practicing." "Wonderful," Claire chirped. "I can't wait to hear what you come up with. Ta-ta!" The line went dead and I slumped against the counter, my mind reeling. What was Claire up to? "Mom?" Sophie's voice startled me. I turned to see my 12-year-old daughter standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with concern. "Are you okay?" I plastered on a smile. "Of course, sweetie. That was just Grandma Claire. She wants me to sing at her party next weekend." Sophie's face lit up. "Really? That's great. Maybe I can play for you." My heart sank. "Actually, honey, Grandma suggested that already." "Oh," Sophie's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. "Well, we can practice together, right?" Before I could answer, the front door opened, and Bennett's voice called out, "I'm home." He strode into the kitchen, his tie already loosened, and gave me a quick peck on the cheek. "Hey, hon, did Mom call you about the party?" I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral. "She did. It was quite a surprise." Bennett grinned, oblivious to my discomfort. "Isn't it great? Mom's always talking about how talented you are. It'll be nice for everyone to hear you sing." I forced a smile. "Right. Nice." Sophie tugged on her father's sleeve. "Dad, can I go to Grandma's tomorrow to practice? She said she'd teach me a new piece." Bennett ruffled her hair. "Sure thing, kiddo. Your grandma loves spending time with you." I bit my tongue, holding back the words I longed to say. How Claire was driving a wedge between me and my daughter. How she constantly undermined me with backhanded compliments and subtle jabs. Instead, I said, "Actually, Sophie, I thought maybe we could practice together this weekend. It's been a while since we've had some mother-daughter time." Sophie's face fell. "But Grandma's expecting me. She said she has a surprise for me." Bennett chuckled. "Come on, Miranda. Let her go. You two can practice during the week." I felt my resolve crumbling under their combined gazes. "Fine," I said, my voice tight. "Have fun at Grandma's, Sophie." As Sophie bounced out of the kitchen, chattering excitedly about her plans, I turned back to the sink, blinking back tears of frustration. Bennett came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "This is going to be great, honey. Mom's so proud of you." I leaned back against him, wishing I could make him understand. But as always, when it came to Claire, Bennett was blind to her manipulations. As I stood there in my husband's embrace, I couldn't shake the feeling that Claire's invitation was more than just a chance for me to sing. It was a challenge, and for once I was determined not to back down. The weekend arrived with a sense of dread. As I watched Sophie pack her overnight bag for Claire's, my heart ached. She hummed a tune I didn't recognize, probably something her grandmother had taught her. "Sophie, honey," I said, trying to keep my voice light, "maybe next weekend we could do something together? Just us girls?" She barely glanced up. "Maybe, if I'm not busy with Grandma." The words stung like a slap. I opened my mouth to respond, but Bennett appeared in the doorway. "Ready to go, kiddo?" he asked, car keys jingling in his hand. Sophie bounced up, all smiles. "Yep, bye, Mom." As they left, I sank onto Sophie's bed, fighting back tears. When had I become an afterthought in my own daughter's life? The house felt empty without Sophie's laughter. I tried to distract myself by practicing for Claire's party, but every song felt hollow. By Sunday evening, I was a bundle of nerves. When Bennett's car pulled into the driveway, I rushed to the door. Sophie burst in, chattering excitedly. "Mom, Grandma taught me a new song for the party. Want to hear?" Before I could answer, she was at the piano, her small fingers dancing across the keys. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, far beyond what I thought Sophie capable of playing. "That's wonderful, sweetheart." I managed, my throat tight. Bennett beamed with pride. "Isn't it amazing? Mom's really brought out Sophie's talent." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As Sophie continued to play, I retreated to the kitchen, busying myself with dinner preparations. Bennett followed me. "Hey, you okay?" I took a deep breath. "Bennett, don't you think Claire's been monopolizing Sophie lately?" He frowned. "What do you mean? She's just being a good grandmother. But every weekend and now this party." I trailed off, unsure how to express my fears without sounding paranoid. Bennett's expression softened. "Miranda, Mom's just trying to help. You know how busy you've been with work. She's giving Sophie something special." I bit back a retort. How could I explain that what Claire was giving Sophie was a wedge between us? The week crawled by, each day bringing us closer to Claire's party. I tried to connect with Sophie, but she was always rushing off to practice with her grandmother. By Friday, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear. As we drove to Claire's, my stomach churned with anxiety. Bennett reached over and squeezed my hand. "You'll be great," he said, misreading my tension. Claire's house was already bustling when we arrived. She greeted us at the door, all smiles and air kisses. "Miranda, darling," she cooed, "I can't wait to hear you sing. I do hope you've prepared something appropriate." I forced a smile. "Of course, Claire. I wouldn't want to disappoint." As we moved into the living room, I overheard Claire whispering to another guest. Such a shame. All that potential wasted on silly pop songs. My cheeks burned. I looked for Sophie, hoping for a friendly face, but she was already at the piano, surrounded by admiring relatives. Claire clapped her hands, calling for attention. "Before we begin, I have a special treat. Sophie has prepared a piece to play for us. Sophie, darling?" My daughter nodded, her face serious as she began to play. The room fell silent, enraptured by the music. I watched, a mix of pride and pain swirling in my chest. This was my daughter, yet I felt no connection to her talent. As Sophie finished, the room erupted in applause. Claire swept forward, enveloping Sophie in a hug. "Wasn't she marvelous?" Claire gushed. "Such talent, it must skip a generation." The room tittered with laughter. I stood frozen, the implied insult hanging in the air. Bennett, oblivious as always, joined in the applause. In that moment, watching Claire bask in my daughter's reflected glory, something inside me snapped. This wasn't just about a party or a song. This was war, and I was done playing nice. The days following Claire's party were a blur of tension and barely concealed anger. I tried to talk to Bennett about Claire's behavior, but he brushed off my concerns, chalking it up to family dynamics. It was clear I was on my own in this battle. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry in Sophie's room, I stumbled upon a crumpled piece of paper tucked under her bed. Curiosity got the better of me, and I smoothed it out. My heart sank as I read the childish scrawl, "Things Grandma Claire says about Mom." 1. Mom doesn't understand real music. 2. Mom wastes her talent on silly songs. 3. Mom is jealous of my piano skills. 4. Mom doesn't support my dreams like Grandma does. The list went on, each point a dagger to my heart. I sank onto Sophie's bed, the paper trembling in my hands. How long had Claire been poisoning my daughter against me? Just then, Sophie burst into the room. Her eyes widened when she saw what I was holding. "Mom, that's private," she cried, snatching the paper from my hands. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sophie, honey, we need to talk about this. These things Grandma's been saying." "They're true," Sophie interrupted, her face flushing. "Grandma says you're just jealous because I'm better at music than you ever were." The words hit me like a physical blow. I struggled to find a response, but Sophie was already storming out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I sat there, stunned, as the full weight of Claire's manipulation settled over me. She hadn't just been trying to win Sophie's affection. She'd been actively turning my daughter against me. That evening, as Bennett and I were cleaning up after dinner, I decided to make one last attempt to open his eyes. "Bennett," I began cautiously, "I found something in Sophie's room today. A list of things your mother's been saying about me." He frowned. pausing in drying a plate. What kind of things? I recounted some of the items on the list, watching his face carefully. To my dismay, I saw more confusion than concern. Are you sure you're not misinterpreting? He asked. Mom can be blunt sometimes, but I'm sure she doesn't mean any harm. I slammed the dish I was washing into the sink, soapy water splashing everywhere. For God's sake, Bennett, when are you going to see what's really going on? Before he could respond, Sophie appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Is this about my recital? I turned confused. What recital? Sophie's eyes darted between Bennett and me. The one at school next week? Grandma's been helping me prepare a special song. My heart sank. How had I not known about this? Sophie, why didn't you tell me? She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. Grandma said it would be a nice surprise for you. I felt the last thread of my composure snap. A surprise? Your grandmother has no right to. Miranda, Bennett cut in, his voice sharp. That's enough. You're upsetting Sophie. I looked at my daughter, saw the tears welling in her eyes, and felt my anger deflate, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. I'm sorry, sweetie. Of course, I'd love to hear you sing at your recital. Sophie nodded, then fled back to her room. Bennett gave me a disappointed look before following her. Left alone in the kitchen, I leaned against the counter, my mind racing. The recital. It was the perfect opportunity to show Sophie and Bennett that I wasn't the villain Claire had painted me to be. To prove that I could support my daughter's talents without Claire's interference. As I formulated a plan, a small, determined smile crept onto my face. Claire thought she had won, but the final act was yet to come, and this time I would be the one writing the score. The day of Sophie's recital arrived, and my nerves were frayed to breaking point. I'd spent the week trying to connect with Sophie, but she remained distant, always rushing off to practice with Claire. Bennett, sensing the tension, had become a silent mediator, his eyes darting between us with growing concern. As we drove to the school, Sophie clutched a folder to her chest, her knuckles white. Grandma's meeting us there, she announced, her voice tinged with excitement. My stomach clenched, but I forced a smile. That's nice, sweetie. I can't wait to hear you sing. The auditorium was packed with proud parents and fidgeting siblings. We found seats near the front, saving one for Claire. I scanned the crowd, my heart racing when I spotted her sweeping down the aisle, resplendent in a designer suit. There's my star! Claire exclaimed, embracing Sophie. She barely acknowledged me with a curt nod. As the lights dimmed, I leaned over to Sophie. Break a leg, honey, I love you. She smiled weakly, then hurried backstage. Claire settled into her seat, a smug expression on her face. The recital began, a parade of nervous children stumbling through simple melodies. Then Sophie stepped onto the stage. My breath caught in my throat. She looked so grown up, so poised. The piano intro began, and Sophie started to sing. Her voice, clear and sweet, filled the auditorium. I felt tears prick my eyes, overwhelmed with pride. But as the song progressed, my pride turned to confusion, then dismay. The lyrics were unfamiliar, the melody complex. This wasn't a children's song, it was an aria from a famous opera. I glanced at Claire, who was beaming triumphantly. She caught my eye and whispered, I thought Sophie deserved a real challenge, not some silly pop tune. Anger flared in my chest. This was what Claire had been secretly preparing? A piece far beyond Sophie's years, designed to showcase Claire's teaching rather than Sophie's natural talent? As Sophie hit a particularly difficult passage, her voice wavered. I saw panic flash in her eyes. Without thinking, I stood up, my own voice rising to support hers. Our voices blended, steadying Sophie and carrying her through to the end. The audience erupted in applause. Sophie's face lit up as she spotted me, relief and joy shining in her eyes. For a moment it was just us, mother and daughter, connected by music. Then Claire was on her feet, rushing to the stage. Oh, darling, you were marvelous, she gushed, pulling Sophie into a hug. I knew you could do it. I watched, my moment of connection shattered, as Claire basked in the audience's admiration. Bennett touched my arm. That was amazing, Miranda. I had no idea you could sing like that. Before I could respond, Sophie broke free from Claire's embrace and ran to me. Mom, did you hear? We sang together. I hugged her tightly. We did, sweetheart. You were wonderful. Claire's voice cut through our moment. Sophie, dear, come take a photo with Grandma. We must commemorate your triumph. Sophie hesitated, looking between Claire and me. I saw the conflict in her eyes, the pull of Claire's influence warring with our rekindled connection. In that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't let Claire steal this from me, from us. Actually, I said, my voice steady, I think Sophie and I should take a picture together first. After all, we did just perform an impromptu duet. Claire's face darkened. Now, Miranda, don't be selfish. Sophie's performance was the result of my teaching, and— No, Sophie interrupted, her voice small but firm. I want a picture with Mom first. The shock on Claire's face mirrored my own surprise. As Sophie pulled me towards the stage, I caught sight of Bennett's expression, a mix of confusion and dawning realization. Standing there with Sophie, surrounded by applauding parents and beaming children, I felt a shift. The battle lines had been drawn, and for the first time I wasn't standing alone. As the camera flashed, capturing our smiling faces, I knew the war with Claire was far from over. But now I had hope, and I had my daughter back. The aftermath of Sophie's recital brought a fragile peace to our household. Sophie, buoyed by our duet, began seeking me out for impromptu singing sessions. It was like a balm to my wounded heart, but I knew Claire wouldn't give up so easily. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Bennett approached me with a hesitant smile. Miranda, I've been thinking, maybe we should have a family dinner this weekend. Invite Mom over, try to clear the air. I nearly dropped the knife I was holding. Clear the air? Bennett, your mother has been. I know, he interrupted, surprising me. I've been noticing things. But she's still family. We need to address this head on. Reluctantly, I agreed. Perhaps this was my chance to confront Claire with Bennett as a witness. The night of the dinner arrived, tension thick in the air. Claire swept in, all smiles and false warmth. Miranda, darling, how lovely to see you taking an interest in homemaking again. I bit my tongue, forcing a smile. As we sat down to eat, Claire dominated the conversation, regaling us with tales of her musical accomplishments. I caught Sophie's eye across the table, seeing a flicker of doubt in her expression. You know, Claire said, helping herself to more wine, I've been thinking. Sophie's talent is truly exceptional. She needs proper nurturing. I've spoken to a friend who runs an elite music academy. They're willing to offer Sophie a scholarship, but it would mean her living with me during the week. The room fell silent. I felt as if all the air had been sucked out of my lungs. Absolutely not, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Claire's eyes narrowed. Now, Miranda, Miranda, don't be selfish. This is about Sophie's future. Selfish? I explained, years of pent-up frustration pouring out. You're the one who's been manipulating my daughter, turning her against me. Mom, Grandma, please don't, pleaded, her eyes wide with distress. Bennett stood up, his face pale. Maybe we should all calm down and— No, Bennett. I cut him off. It's time we address this. Your mother has been systematically undermining me, poisoning Sophie against me, and you've been too blind to see it. Claire's facade cracked, her voice turning cold. How dare you? I've only ever wanted what's best for Sophie. Unlike you, who's content to let her talent wither while you chase your own faded dreams. The words hit me like a physical blow. I saw Sophie's face crumple, tears welling in her eyes. In that moment, I knew I had to do something drastic. I couldn't let this continue. Enough, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. Claire, I challenge you. At the next family gathering, we'll both perform. Let everyone see who's really the talented one in this family. Claire's eyebrows shot up, a smirk playing at her lips. My dear, are you sure you want to embarrass yourself like that? Mom, what are you doing? Sophie whispered, her eyes wide. I met Claire's gaze, unflinching. I'm dead serious, unless you're afraid to accept. A tense silence fell over the room. Bennett looked between us, bewildered. Sophie clutched her napkin, her knuckles white. Finally, Claire nodded, a predatory gleam in her eye. Very well, Miranda, if that's what it takes to settle this nonsense once and for all, I accept your challenge. As Claire swept out of the house, leaving a wake of stunned silence, the full weight of what I'd done crashed over me. I just challenged a former piano major to a musical duel in front of our entire family. But as I looked at Sophie's face, a mix of worry and something that looked like hope, I knew I couldn't back down. This was my chance to reclaim my daughter's respect, to show her the strength of her mother's love. I excused myself and retreated to our bedroom, my mind racing. I had 2 weeks to prepare for the performance of my life. As I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands shaking, I realized this wasn't just about music anymore. This was about saving my family. With a deep breath, I reached for my old songbook. It was time to remind everyone, including myself, of who Miranda really was. The day of the family gathering arrived, my stomach a knot of nerves. I'd spent every spare moment practicing, determined to show Claire and everyone else what I was truly capable of. As we drove to the venue, a rented hall for the occasion, Sophie's excited chatter filled the car. "Mom, are you nervous? Grandma's been practicing all week, too." I forced a smile. "A little, sweetie, but I'm mostly excited to sing for everyone." Bennett squeezed my hand. "You'll be great, Miranda. Both of you will." The hall was already bustling when we arrived. I spotted Claire holding court near the piano, surrounded by adoring relatives. She caught my eye and smirked, raising her glass in a mock toast. As the evening progressed, I found myself growing increasingly anxious. Claire had yet to perform, and I worried she might back out of our agreement. Just as I was about to confront her, Sophie tugged at my sleeve. "Mom, can I play something on the piano?" Before I could answer, Claire swooped in. "Of course, darling. Why don't you play that lovely piece we've been working on?" I bit my tongue, not wanting to cause a scene. Sophie settled at the piano, her small fingers poised over the keys. As she began to play, I noticed something odd. The melody was familiar, but not from our recent practice sessions. It was an old lullaby I used to sing to Sophie when she was a baby. Tears pricked my eyes as Sophie's clear voice joined the piano. This wasn't one of Claire's complex pieces. It was a simple, heartfelt song that Sophie and I had shared countless times. As the last notes faded, the room erupted in applause. Sophie beamed, her eyes seeking mine for approval. I nodded, too choked up to speak. Claire, looking flustered, quickly took center stage. Well, wasn't that sweet? Now I believe Miranda and I had a little musical duel planned, shall we? The room fell silent, all eyes on us. Claire seated herself at the piano, launching into a technically impressive but emotionally sterile rendition of a classical piece. I watched the audience's reactions, noting the polite smiles and stifled yawns. As Claire finished, she turned to me with a triumphant grin. "Top that, dear." I took a deep breath and stepped forward. But before I could begin, Sophie piped up. "Grandma, why don't you sing something?" "Yeah, you always say singing is the true test of musical talent." A hush fell over the room. Claire's face paled slightly. "Oh, I don't know, darling. My voice isn't what it used to be." "Please, Grandma." Sophie pressed, her eyes wide and innocent. "You're always telling me how important it is to challenge yourself." Trapped by her own words, Claire reluctantly stood. Well, I suppose I could try a little something. What followed was painful to watch. Claire's voice, thin and wavering, struggled through a simple folk song. She hit several wrong notes, her face growing redder with each mistake. The audience shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. As Claire trailed off, visibly shaken, I felt a mix of triumph and pity. This was my moment. I could humiliate her as she had done to me so many times. But looking at Sophie's confused face, I knew that wasn't the right path. Instead, I stepped forward and began to sing the lullaby Sophie had played earlier. My voice, strong and clear, filled the room. I saw recognition dawn in the eyes of my family members. This was the real me, the singer they had known before Claire's influence had diminished me. As I sang, I locked eyes with Claire. Her expression was a mix of shock, anger, and something else. Was it respect? The room was silent except for my voice, everyone transfixed. Just as I reached the final verse, Sophie joined in, her sweet voice blending perfectly with mine. We finished the song together, our voices intertwining in perfect harmony. The applause was deafening. Sophie threw her arms around me, laughing and crying at the same time. I hugged her tightly, feeling years of tension melt away. But as I looked up, I saw Claire storming out of the room, her face a mask of fury. Bennett followed her, his expression torn. I realized then that while I might have won this battle, the war was far from over, and the next confrontation would determine the future of our family once and for all. The aftermath of the family gathering was like the calm before a storm. Sophie clung to me, her eyes shining with newfound admiration, while Bennett oscillated between pride in my performance and concern for his mother. Claire had vanished, leaving a wake of whispers and speculation. 3 days later, as I was helping Sophie with her homework, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Claire, her face a mask of cold determination. "We need to talk," she said, brushing past me into the living room. Bennett appeared from his study, his face etched with worry. "Mom? What's going on?" Claire's eyes darted between us. "I've made a decision. I'm taking Sophie to live with me." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "What?" I gasped, my voice barely audible. "It's clear that Sophie's talent is being wasted here," Claire continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "I've already spoken to my lawyer. I'm filing for custody." Bennett stepped forward, his face pale. "Mom, you can't be serious. Sophie belongs with us." "Does she?" Claire's eyes narrowed. With a father too blind to see what's best for her, and a mother who's more concerned with her own faded dreams than her daughter's future? Something inside me snapped. Years of pent-up frustration and anger burst forth like a dam breaking. "How dare you!" I shouted, my hands shaking. "You've been poisoning Sophie against me for years, manipulating her, trying to steal her away. And for what? To relive your own glory days through her." Claire recoiled, shock flashing across her face before it hardened again. "I've only ever wanted what's best for Sophie. Unlike you, Miranda, I can see her true potential." "Stop it!" Sophie's voice cut through the tension. We all turned to see her standing in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. Just stop fighting." I moved to comfort her, but she backed away. "Sophie, honey." "No," she cried. "I'm tired of all the secrets and the mean words. Grandma, why did you tell me Mom doesn't love me as much as you do?" The room fell silent. Bennett's head snapped towards his mother, disbelief etched on his face. "Mom, is that true?" Claire's composure cracked. I never meant." But Sophie wasn't finished. "And Mom, why didn't you tell me Grandma was lying? Why did you let me believe her?" I felt the weight of my own mistakes crushing me. "Oh, Sophie, I'm so sorry. I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" Bennett's voice was low, dangerous. "Miranda, how long has this been going on?" I took a deep breath, knowing this was the moment of truth. "For years, Bennett, your mother has been undermining me, turning Sophie against me. I tried to tell you, but you never wanted to see it." Bennett's face crumpled. I didn't want to believe it." "Mom, how could you?" Claire's facade finally shattered. "I was trying to protect Sophie. Miranda's not good enough for this family. She never was." The room exploded into chaos. Bennett and Claire shouting, Sophie sobbing, and me standing in the middle of it all, feeling like my world was imploding. Suddenly, Sophie bolted for the door. Without thinking, I ran after her, my heart pounding. I caught up to her at the end of our driveway, pulling her into my arms. "Sophie, please," I begged, my voice breaking. "I love you so much. I'm so sorry for everything." She clung to me, her small body shaking with sobs. "I don't want to go with Grandma. I want to stay with you and Dad." I held her tighter, looking back at our house where Bennett and Claire's silhouettes were visible through the window, still arguing. In that moment, I knew we'd reached a turning point. Everything I'd fought for, everything I loved, hung in the balance. As I stood there, my daughter in my arms and my family in turmoil, I realized that the next few moments would determine the course of our lives forever. It was time to fight not just for myself, but for the future of our family, and this time I wouldn't back down. I stood in our driveway, holding Sophie close, when Bennett emerged from the house. His face was a storm of emotions. Anger, confusion, and a dawning realization that seemed to age him before my eyes. "Miranda," he called, his voice hoarse. "Sophie, please come back inside. We need to talk about this as a family." I hesitated, looking down at Sophie. Her tear-stained face was resolute. "Only if Grandma leaves," she said, her voice small but firm. Bennett nodded, turning back to the house. We followed, my heart pounding with each step. As we entered the living room, Claire stood by the window, her posture rigid with defiance. "Claire," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice, "I think it's time for you to go." She whirled around, her eyes flashing. "You can't dismiss me from my son's house." "It's our house, Mom," Bennett interjected, his tone weary but determined. "And right now, we need to be alone with our daughter." Claire's face crumpled, the mask of superiority finally shattering. "Bennett, surely you can't believe these ridiculous accusations? Everything I've done has been for this family." "No, Grandma," Sophie spoke up, her voice stronger now. "It was for you. You wanted me to be like you, not like me or Mom." A heavy silence fell over the room. Claire looked from face to face, searching for an ally and finding none. Finally, her shoulders sagged in defeat. I never meant to cause such pain, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I only wanted the best for Sophie. The best for Sophie is to have a mother who loves her unconditionally, I said, my voice gentle but firm. Not one who tries to mold her into someone else's image. Bennett stepped forward, placing a hand on his mother's shoulder. Mom, I think it's best if you give us some space. We'll call you when we're ready to talk again. Claire nodded, her usual poise completely shattered. As she gathered her things and left, the tension in the room seemed to leave with her. We sat together on the couch, Sophie nestled between Bennett and me. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Bennett broke the silence. I owe you both an apology, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I should have seen what was happening. I should have protected you. I reached across Sophie to take his hand. We all made mistakes, Bennett. What matters now is how we move forward. Sophie looked up at us, her eyes wide. Are we going to be okay? I hugged her close, feeling Bennett's arm encircle us both. Yes, sweetheart. We're going to be more than okay. We're going to be happy. Over the next few weeks, we began the process of healing. Bennett and I had long, honest conversations about the years of tension and misunderstandings. We decided to start family therapy, determined to build a stronger foundation for our relationships. Sophie blossomed without the weight of Claire's expectations. We encouraged her to explore her own interests, whether that was music, art, or anything else that sparked her passion. As for me, I rediscovered my love for singing, not for accolades or approval, but for the pure joy it brought me. I started giving small performances at local cafes, with Bennett and Sophie cheering me on from the front row. Claire remained on the periphery of our lives. We didn't cut her off entirely, but we set clear boundaries. Over time, she began to see the damage her actions had caused. It was a slow process, but gradually she started to change. One year after that fateful confrontation, we hosted a small gathering at our home. As I stood in our backyard watching Bennett flip burgers on the grill and Sophie play with her cousins, I felt a profound sense of peace. Claire approached me, her demeanor hesitant. Miranda, she said softly, I want you to know, I'm truly sorry for everything. You're a wonderful mother and a talented woman. I was wrong to ever make you feel otherwise. I looked at her, seeing not the formidable adversary of the past year, but a woman who had lost her way and was trying to find it again. Thank you, Claire, I replied. That means a lot. As we stood there, an impromptu sing-along broke out among the kids. Without thinking, I joined in, my voice blending with theirs. To my surprise, Claire began to sing too. Our eyes met, and for the first time, I saw genuine warmth in her smile. In that moment, surrounded by the family we had fought so hard to protect and heal, I knew that we had not just survived the storm. We had emerged stronger, more loving, and more authentic than ever before. And that, I realized, was the sweetest victory of all.